Muy buenos días a todos. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar Mexico's Auto Industry Outlook in the framework of the Mexico's Automotive Summit. I'm Sergio Ornelas, editor of Mexico Now, and today we have an extraordinary group of panelists for whom we will pose 12 questions that will take us approximately 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll try to answer as many questions from the audience. So I will introduce our stellar group, starting with Dr. Jose Sosaya, who is the new president of the Mexico's Automotive Association since August. And Dr. Sosaya's 40 years experience will undoubtedly fortify AMIA's influence in the sector. Welcome, Dr. Sosaya.
Thank you so much, and good morning, and pleased and honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, the other ace in our group is Bruce Belzowski, an old friend. He heads the Automotive Futures enterprise out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he has 25 years of experience in global auto industry subjects. He headed the University of Michigan's Transport Research Institute for about 20 or so years. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Sergio. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone.
Okay, very good. And from Boston, Massachusetts, we have Guido Vildoso. He's the senior manager for the Americas Light Vehicles Forecasting. He has been in that position for about 15 years, and he's worked with us for 14 of those 15 years. Welcome, Guido.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Don Sergio. Delighted to join you once again in this event that has become a household staple of the automotive industry in Mexico.
Thank you, Guido. And if I may, I will start with you. IHS has for decades actually followed the Mexico's auto industry. Would you mind sharing with us your numerical outlook take on what the production in North America will look like going forward?
As always, guys, IHS is basically one of the leading providers of numbers to several different industries, among which the automotive is one of the critical pillars that we look at, and North America being one of the most important ones out of those critical pillars. As we look at automotive production around the world, there has certainly been an impact due to COVID-19, and if we bring that down to the region, the impact as a whole that we expect for 2020 is roughly about 20%, a 20% contraction, moving down to roughly 13 million units of production. However, if you look at how that output has come out throughout the year, you will notice that we had a big hole. So basically the last plant closed around the 25th of March, and we restarted operations around the 17th of May. So most of the impact was during the second quarter of the year, and we've actually been coming along full steam ever since. At least for now, we know that things are starting to look a little bit more promising. So if we project that into the future, we're basically looking at moving at a rate of 16 million units throughout the forecast horizon over the next three to 4 years. With that, back to you, Don Sergio.
Thank you, Guido. Do you have, by any chance, a breakdown of the Mexico, US, and Canada production?
Not here, in order to keep it simple, but essentially what we're looking at is Mexico going from 3.6 to 3 million, which is very much in line with the contraction that we have at an aggregate level of 20%. So Canada was the one hurt the most, Mexico number 2, and the US the least, because of course the momentum or the strength this year has been in full-size pickups and full-size SUVs, most of which are really built in the US.
Okay, thank you, Guido. Dr. Sosaya, over the last decade, Mexico attracted large investments from Japanese, European, and American OEMs. What is the outlook of OEMs investments in Mexico for the midterm future?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that very interesting question. Yeah, and according to the data that we have from the Ministry of Economy, over the past 10 years, $52.3 billion have been invested in the Mexican automobile industry, and that is 16% of the total foreign direct investment received by Mexico. That shows you the importance of the auto sector in the country. Such investment has allowed us to have 14 companies with facilities for manufacturing light vehicles and engines, and they are distributed in 14 different states all over the Mexican Republic, mainly from the center of the country to the north. What is called, we call it the industrial corridor, and goes from the center to the north of the country. Therefore, Mexico's light vehicle manufacturing capacity is about 5 million units. Its capacity, that's what I'm talking about, not the production really. However, the highest production we have achieved is 3.9 million vehicles in 2017. And we expected that the total production in 2020 will be between 2.9 and 3 million vehicles because of the economic crisis and the pandemic caused by COVID-19, which means we will be using about 58 and 60% of the installed capacity that we have in the country. Under such circumstances, there may be no announcements of new investment on light vehicle assembly plants, especially if we take into account that most automobile brands already have manufacturing facilities in our country, some of them with a significant investment within the last 18 years. Just last month, one of the auto manufacturers in Mexico announced an investment in a facility in Guanajuato. That's something new, that's interesting, that they are investing some hundreds of millions of dollars to this new facility. However, there are significant opportunities for further investment in the automobile supplier chain, mainly for tier 2 and tier 3 onwards as a result of the US, Mexico, and Canada agreement. Now, new rules of origin that promotes greater regional integration as compared to the NAFTA have changed a little the name of the game, let's call it that way. So we will see, and I hope that we will see after the pandemic is, let's call it controlled, if not hopefully resolved, but at least controlled, we will see a more faster improvement of the economy, and that will lead us hopefully also to have new and greater investments in the auto industry. That would be my comment.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Sosaya. Indeed, quite a journey that we've had of investments.
Yeah.
Bruce, now COVID-19 disrupted the auto industry globally and in the US. What are some of the structural changes that you see coming in the US auto industry vis-a-vis employment, supply chain, and Mexico in particular to respond to the pandemic?
Well, Sergio, I think the key word that we keep hearing over and over again is the word reshoring. And now, and it's reshoring to North America or specifically to the US, but also maybe to Mexico because of Mexico's lower labor rates. So this is a story that's been going on for a while, though. It's the labor rates in China have been increasing, and I think there's already been a certain amount of reshoring that's taken place even before the pandemic. But I think that when you look at some of the early issues related to the pandemic in North America, I think there was a lot of too much made of some of the early parts shortages from China early on in the pandemic. I don't think it really particularly hurt competitiveness because it seemed like all the companies were hurt at the same time. Plus, people were buying fewer vehicles in general because of the uncertainty and the length of the pandemic and its effects on jobs. In terms of employment and Mexican suppliers, in general, I think that they've responded pretty well to the pandemic, but there continue to be some production stoppages for parts shortages. It's not anything systemic, but individual companies lose money if their profitable plants don't run. The key phrase for all suppliers has always been, don't be the company that shuts down a plant. And this applies to the pandemic or non-pandemic times. I think some of our other speakers would be able to talk about some of the issues related to what has been going on in Mexico in particular, related to the supply base and any shortages that are going on. But I haven't seen anything systemic throughout the industry that would say that it was hurting the industry, especially at this stage.
Very good. Guido, all of this has resulted in low inventories in the US for sales. Production delays and supply chain disruptions have not been able to keep up with demand. Mexico is expected to drop by 30% even this year in production. When do you think the industry, the sector will come back to normalcy in production and in the consumer markets?
That's a good question, Don Sergio, and it really depends on how you're measuring the industry. You know, pre-pandemic, we would say that we're running low on inventory levels. We basically have about 50 days supply right now, meaning that if we had to catch up to the 65, 68 days average that we have historically seen in the US, meaning 2-month supply, we would have to build an additional 750,000 vehicles or so, which is really putting us into the second or third quarter of next year in order to just to level off. But what we have seen from OEMs, particularly as they have presented their financial reports, and dealers also seem to be mirroring this, is that they're very happy or they're happier with the lower inventory levels that we're seeing presently today, because you can command higher prices. The fact that you can't get the car right away, that you're not paying for showroom and so on and so forth. So this may be disruptive in regards to what we see in the future. As of right now, we assume that we are going to go back to 65, 68 days, but there are already some trends that we are seeing within the industry that who knows, the new normal may be 50 further down the road.
Very good, interesting. And Dr. Sosaya, Mexico received 2 punches this year, the new requirements for the trade agreement and the pandemic, of course. When and how do OEMs in Mexico plan to comply with the requirements of the new trade agreement, specifically with the 75% North American content and the $16 per hour wage for 40% of the content?
Sorry for the delay. A very interesting question, as a matter of fact, and I would like to call it not 2 punches, but 2 opportunities, let's put it that way, to be a little more optimistic on that. And I would say that, as you may remember, the US, Mexico, and Canada agreement, the new rules and requirements of rules of origin allow each company or corporation to decide how to comply with these provisions by submitting a specific program and requesting approval of the staging alternative regime. That allows a longer period of time than originally set out on the treaty to comply with such rules. That can be also as of 5 years, or even could be extended to 7 years. We know most companies established in our country have applied for the approval of the SAR, but however, as of this date, they have not yet, as long as I know, they have not yet received a response on that one. So I think it's interesting to see how the new, or maybe the actual administration in the US is going to respond. So interesting to see it. We all know, from 60% regional integration to 75% regional integration. And that's a big challenge and a big task. And I will put it again in one word, a great opportunity. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Sosaya. And Bruce, The US largely led the USMCA negotiations and largely imposed its agenda. Who are the winners and losers of the new trade agreement? And how do you think the US will actually, and if they will actually gain in auto workers' numbers of jobs going forward?
Well, Sergio, I think the winners.
I'm sorry,
I think the winners for the USMCA agreement are the consultants who will help companies sort out the new regulations. Some of the potential winners are Mexican workers if they can unionize more effectively and raise their standard of living. There was always this was always one of the goals of NAFTA, but now changes are required rather than just recommended. So I think this is one of the big changes for the potential for Mexican workers. The losers are the companies who have to pay more attention and spend more money trying to accommodate the new laws or the rules. This is tempered by the fact that we're already doing this. But some of the new rules, like imports to Mexico that in the past were considered North American because they passed through a supplier in Mexico, will demand changes in accounting and require traceability. Now, one of the loopholes, if you want to call it that, in the whole program is that allows companies to dodge all the rules if they just pay a 2.5% tariff. Now, whether this actually plays out in how it would play out politically between all the different governments is a whole nother story, but it is there that companies can tap into if they really want to. And they'll probably weigh this against the accounting and the traceability costs that are going to be part of the new NAFTA USMCA.
Very good. Thank you, Bruce. Lots of things happening in the industry. And now, like in every transmission, we have a very short message for our new publication, Horsepower. So we'll continue with the questions. And Guido, I keep on calling you and giving us your opinions. Give us your take about the future of mobility in North America.
That's a great question, Don Sergio. And obviously, we have several different dimensions that we have to account for. Obviously, the biggest one of which is really the thought process behind moving over to autonomous vehicles. But mobility really encompasses vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to consumer, which means the user interface, vehicle to the infrastructure. So there's a wide array of items that are covered under this particular spectrum. If we look at the overall larger trend, say what the implications may be of having to simplify the infrastructure, but pre-COVID, we were looking at an impact of roughly about 300,000 units, somewhere between 2025 to 2030, as a result of Uber and some degree of autonomous vehicles, because autonomous, chances are, will move on the heavy commercial vehicle side first before it moves over to the widespread market. with everyone flocking away from the cities, and this is the case for New York, and this is the case for San Francisco, and so on and so forth, cities that had great public infra, or that have, because it's still there, that have great public infrastructure network, and migrating over to the suburbs, and it's really, it can really be reflected in the behavior of some of the home prices that we are seeing in the US today. That puts a question mark over what we are going to see. It also puts a question mark that is also related to mobility, because mobility also implies how frequently do you replace a vehicle. Since folks like you and I are working from home, we're not really driving our vehicles. So we've seen a drop in the number of vehicles miles traveled in the US, which may raise a question that if this trend endures, that we could potentially see a slower replacement of demand further down the road. As a result, do you really need an autonomous vehicle anymore? The other side to this equation is, because you're not driving as much, it opens up the door to the opportunity for leasing, and meaning that now that I'm stuck at home, I can't travel, or that I'm working from home, I'm going to, and I don't have to put all of these miles on my vehicle, I'm going to treat myself to a nicer, finer car. So the evolution of the pandemic is certainly going to be a major disruptor on what we initially thought mobility was going to be in a not so distant future, meaning the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Guido. Interesting times. And Bruce, with Joe Biden now being president-elect, he will likely reverse some of Trump's anti-environmental regulations. What is the general outlook for emissions and the future of electric vehicle sales in the US?
Thanks, Sergio. We expect emissions regulations to support the president-elect's thinking on global warming, which includes reducing CO2 emissions from transport, buildings, energy generation, industry, agriculture. So it's going to come at a variety of levels, again, but it also applies to the auto industry. Now, this is an industry that's in the early stages of developing the technology that will allow them to compete in all segments of the industry in terms of EVs, not just luxury vehicles. Now, light trucks represent probably about 70% of vehicle sales in the US. So consumer preferences must be addressed by providing SUVs, pickup trucks, and minivans that are SUVs and that are EVs. So because we're in the early stages of development, because most OEMs make their profit from light trucks and gas vehicles in general, that's something that we've been dealing with for a long time. Until they move into this light truck segment, EV sales will continue to be low. Our expert survey reported 6% EV penetration by 2025 and 14% penetration by 2030. With those kind of low penetration rates, it will take a long time to turn over the US fleet, probably 20 to 30 years. So we will need to plan on having gas vehicles with us for a long time.
Thank you, Bruce. Very interesting times. And Dr. Sosaya, when the time comes for electric vehicles, will OEMs in Mexico be able to make the swift change from producing internal combustion vehicles to electric ones? And are there any existing today, any OEM is producing electric vehicles or hybrid ones?
Yes, the Mexico auto industry has already started to build some electrical and hybrid vehicles in Mexico and send them to the market. So we are ready. I think they are ready. It all will depend on if we consider numbers mentioned by Bruce on time frame in which this will be more, will continue to grow the demand on these kind of vehicles. I think Mexico is very, very well prepared to be swifting or changing the volumes from one kind of vehicles to the other. The facilities are here, the know-how is here. We already, as I already said, produce them. So yes, we are ready to do the SWIFT and the change. I would like to add just one more point here, at least for Mexico auto industry and for the local market, to be ready for this kind of vehicles. It is very important that we also have the needed infrastructure. It is important to point out that thing, because it looks like, okay, a political decision will change it from day one to day two. I don't see it coming. I mean, we first have to build all the needed infrastructure, and then we can launch that kind of vehicles in a massive way to the markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Susaya. Indeed, infrastructure is a key element both in Mexico and the US. Now, Guido, yesterday, President López Obrador announced a new Secretary of the Economy for Mexico. What do you think the federal government in Mexico should do to improve the competitiveness of the Mexican auto industry, both in production and in sales?
That's a great question, Don Sergio. And, it's like you pointed out, they're two completely different beasts, so they need to be treated completely different. I will start with sales and then obviously move over to production, just because sales is a straightforward process. You really need to look at discounts in order to be able to have more momentum when it comes to automotive demand. You can do that through two channels, either subsidized credits, or you can do it through a reduction of the current taxing scheme that you have for Mexico. It's one of the biggest challenges that the market will continue to face. We really don't have any vehicles under 200,000 pesos presently. And if you think about the fact that just 5 years ago, we had an entry market of subcompact vehicles, subcompactos, under 100,000 pesos, those have basically doubled in price, whereas incomes have not necessarily doubled in price. If anything, interest rates did go up for a little bit, so they became more expensive too. So affordability was an issue, and that really explains why we went from the 1.6 million to 1.3 last year, and wrapping up below 1 million units this year. And in order to get back to 1.3, let alone 1.6, it's going to take several years if we continue to see the inflationary pressures on automotive momentum, which is not really only related to the currency, but also due to the fact that vehicles are more expensive and Mexican consumers are more refined and they want bigger and better vehicles. So that's a challenge that they need to address. And again, we would either look at incentives or a taxing structure being a part of this. From a manufacturing standpoint, Mexico is, to a certain extent, the crown jewel when it comes to North America. You've got phenomenal quality, you've got incredible know-how, and you have a wide array of free trade agreements, plus world-class facilities. So it is a crown jewel when you look at it like that. However, what it doesn't have, to our particular degree of comfort, is the research and development that you would see, for example, in the U.S., or that you see it in one other nation in the region, which is Brazil, for example. And research and development is critical, because as you're looking at all these trends, you're looking at mobility, you're looking at electrification, and so on and so forth. Having some of that knowledge and developing that knowledge locally and being prepared for that and adapting to that rather than being reactive is critical. And Mexico so far has really played aggressively on the manufacturing side and not so much on the thinking ahead. It's not like the electric cars aren't being built in Mexico. Mustang Mach-E has already been built in Cuautitlán. But what are the other things that we should be doing at this point in time?
Thank you, Guido. Lots of things that we should be doing. Bruce, China got in President Trump finally what they deserved. And they were witnessing a little trade war between China and the US. What, if any, are going to be the effects on North American markets? And are there any hidden opportunities in this situation for Mexico?
Well, Sergio, it sounds like the president-elect will continue the tariffs on Chinese goods and use it as a tool for negotiating with the Chinese rather than just demanding that they obey whatever the U.S. says. So I think you'll see a different tone from Washington in terms of negotiating. But one of the sticks that they have are the tariffs that are already in place. It'll be interesting to see how long that stays and what way how they're going to use it. Now, the previous administration really didn't have the leverage that they thought they had with the Chinese government. You know, tariff threats work for Mexico and Canada, but not for the EU or China or Japan. Even with all the leverage they had with the USMCA, one could argue that they didn't make dramatic changes to the agreement. Probably, I think this is because the US business leaders were able to temper the effects of the agreement, while the administration could claim some changes and call it a success. It was unlikely that China, the EU, and Japan would bow to that pressure, especially with only a potential 4-year administration. But if the administration had won a second term, it would have been interesting to see who would have blinked first. These are all proud countries, including the US, who must save face in negotiations. China has the added dimension of its expansionist agenda and soft power plays, which make negotiating with them even harder. My guess on the North American market is that one thing the new administration is talking about is creating incentives for companies to relocate to the U.S. This would not include Mexico or Canada, because these incentives would be one-time or temporary. Companies may or may not take up the offer. Really, when it comes down to it, it's kind of unclear why global public companies would move production to a high-cost country unless that company's valuation would benefit from the move. Now, China's itself's been providing incentives for their domestic companies to develop their automotive skills through their joint ventures and then globalize. Some of the IT companies are much more advanced than the auto companies because their products are not as sophisticated and not as expensive for consumers. But it's only a matter of time before Chinese automotive products will be equivalent to vehicles from global automakers. But to reach this goal and sell in established markets, they'll have to increase their cost, especially for safety. A short-term advantage will be in merging IT with their vehicles faster than the global OEMs, as well as EV development. But global OEMs will always compete. They always have, and they'll compete with any competitor. And winning companies and consumers should be able to reap the benefits. Now, the question for Mexico is, and Guido has mentioned some of this, is how long can it continue to be a low-cost manufacturing option without building a middle class that can actually buy the vehicles they produce, and also, as Guido was talking about, have the R&D capability to be able to create maybe even their own vehicles, or at least their own more suppliers to support the different industries. Now, a thriving middle class will advance education, creating more engineers to work on development of EV technology, as well as EV materials and infrastructure challenges. Programmers to use AI and program advanced autonomous systems. Mining for lithium and other materials used in EVs could be a gold mine for Mexico, because the transition to EVs will require a huge change in the materials supply chain that's been developed over the last 100 years for the auto industry. Now, this also applies to the generation of power for EVs. Renewable energy will be in very high demand, and finding ways to provide that to Mexican citizens, or maybe even to export some of it, should be very high on Mexico's to-do list. So there's a lot of options that Mexico can pursue, and so we'll be following it.
Very good, Bruce. Thank you very much. And Dr. Susaya, what are the plans, programs for AMIA going forward in the short and midterm? And will Mexico's auto industry continue to be the main engine for manufacturing and the economy and the exports in Mexico?
I think, well, first of all, the plans for AMIA for the mid and long term is to work very close with the actual administration in order to together make the auto industry more competitive. And more competitive not only in the production side of it, but also in the regulation part of it. I think the regulation part of the auto industry should be reviewed permanently in order to avoid over-regulated. We are a regulated industry. We know how to deal with it. We like to be regulated, but we have to be very careful to don't to go to an over-regulated industry, which will reduce competitiveness. And that's one of the main objectives of AMIA, to work together with the government, to have continuous meetings at different levels in order to communicate properly and hopefully to get to an understanding on what should be and what should not be done in the regulation part of the industry and of the sector. And yes, I do think that the auto industry will continue to be one of the most powerful engines that the Mexican economy has. We will see also, and I hope we will see it once the pandemic crisis passes by. We will see, I think, an increase on also in the aerospace industry, growing and growing faster also. But the auto industry, taking into consideration that it affects almost 29 million jobs in Mexico, it is hard to think that it won't be and it won't continue to be one of the most relevant engines to the Mexican economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Susaya. And we have quite a few questions here from the audience. I encourage you to send more. We have a question here from Susana Gama for Dr. Susaya. Is there any program in the agenda of the AMIA in order to promote and support the local content increase?
As you may know, we work together with our members of AMIA in the different programs that they have. But those programs basically are in the manufacturing part of, meaning on the different automakers, not in the side of AMIA. AMIA will and continues to gather information and spread it and also communicate it to the media and to the government, but do not have a specific program itself.
Thank you, Dr. Susaya. There's another question here from Florian Haft, or either Guido or Bruce. How do you see the penetration of OEMs and Chinese vehicles in the Mexican market?
Well, I think that there will be, I think there already are some Chinese vehicles in the Mexican market. The Chinese will use developing economies as a way to kind of practice globalization, how to globalize your supply, your distribution chain, your supply chain. As you know, to sell vehicles in a country, you're going to have actually have dealerships, and you're going to have spare parts, and you're going to have a lot of money to be able to continually supply that for your dealerships. And I think that this is Mexico will be someplace that the Chinese vehicles will show up, and I think they already are, and they probably will continue to be used as a platform for the Chinese vehicles. What do you think, Guido?
Great points, Bruce. And if I can comment on this, Mexico has historically been a closed market to those brands that do not have a free trade agreement. meaning their production is based out of region. And by region, it could be South America, it could be Europe, it could be North America. So that, to begin with, is a challenge going on for Mexican vehicles as we see them right now. Now, in all fairness, I think my particular bearishness to the success of Chinese brands in Mexico has probably been too pessimistic. The way that they have approached the market has been more successful than what we or I personally expected, and this is due to the knowledge that some of the dealer groups had in order to sell these vehicles, bringing the right product and trying to accommodate the dealerships in the right location. But beyond that, and building up on Bruce's point, to be able to become a Kia, to be able to become a Mazda, sooner or later, you will have to have production. And obviously, this is going to be tied into what we see in the US and how quickly they can launch in the US in order to cover all of those economies of scale. And when you're looking at that, you're looking at $1 billion investment, and that's what is critical in order to hit 50,000 units or 100,000 units in annual sales within the Mexican market. So those are certainly some of the challenges that we're going to have to see. I want to mirror and echo what Dr. Sosaya said earlier. These are opportunities. I'm not trying to say that it can't be done. It's just opportunities for what could potentially come from the Chinese OEMs further down the road.
Thank you, Guido and Bruce. We get a question here from Enrique Quirarte. Basically, what elements of the supply chain or products are missing and would be required to support automotive growth in Mexico? If you had $1 million, where would you invest in the value chain of the auto industry? For anybody.
That's a very interesting question. And if I have a crystal ball, I will put my $1 million there. I mean, the supplier chain in the auto industry is here. I mean, that's why we are producing. We are the number 4 exporter and number 6 manufacturer of cars all over the world. So we have it. So it's a matter of being more competitive. I would say that for the future, I mean, not for the immediate, but midterm, long-term future, then we will have to be looking on auto parts for electric or other kind of vehicles. That's what I think the swift or the change on the auto industry is going to be, and also for the supply chain will become the change on the way they are providing today. But I think the market has the needed supply chain because it's already doing it, it's already producing, and it's a matter of being more competitive and looking where the auto industry is walking through or going through for the medium-term future. That will be my personal point of view.
I know that in one area that they're starting to, you see some of the supplier reorganizations or joint ventures or buying of other companies, is that you see some of the supply base moving into the area of electronics and sensors in a way that they really, I mean, this is like companies like TRW being bought by other companies that have certain kind of technologies that other suppliers think would be a good blend, and that they're actually changing their whole design. You see this in some of these are the global suppliers, right? These are the ones who are thinking of where do we need to be in the future. So they're continuing to do the work that they do for gas engines, but they're also thinking of saying, we are going to need the programming, we're going to need the electronics that are going to be part of autonomy and part of EVs. And that if we don't have that, we won't be able to get the contracts that we need in the future. So they're trying to have it both ways, try to balance it. And I think it's a challenge for them financially, in the long term, whether they're going to be able to be successful in that. But the auto companies also have this kind of challenge because they're trying to do development on gas vehicles, and they're trying to do development on electric vehicles at the same time. Somebody like Tesla goes, we're not going to do gas vehicles, we're just going to do electric vehicles, and it makes it easier for them in terms of R&D. And so I think these are some of the challenges that that both the suppliers and the manufacturers are facing right now.
Thank you, Bruce. We have a large paragraph here from Oscar Ramirez, but basically the most interesting subject he's asking about is what would be the effect of the federal government prohibiting outsourcing in Mexico?
This is which federal government?
Mexico's there's a movement from the Mexican president and the Mexican Congress to practically disregard outsourcing, making it prohibited for companies to outsource anything.
What is the question? I'm sorry, I did not get the whole question.
Yeah, the question is.
I know it's about outsourcing, but.
Yeah, as you know, Dr. Sosaya, AMLO, Mexico's president, is trying to prohibit outsourcing. It's making a big discussion about it. How would this affect the Mexican auto industry?
Okay, this, if you ask me, I would say it will affect almost all different sectors of the industry in Mexico. It is a figure, a legal figure, let's call it that way, and let's be very clear on that one. It is a legal figure that has been used to increase competitiveness and to support production process in different sectors of the industry. We know that the reason behind the decision of the president is because of the misuse of that figure for certain companies or certain people, but that is not the case of the auto industry. The auto industry has used this figure legally, and we are working very close with the different private sector institutions and in negotiations with the government in order to make sure that the changes in this field, in order to fulfill the concerns of the government, will also include the concerns of the private sector to continue being productive, to continue being competitive. I am thinking and I am hoping that first of all, these changes will be not taken this month, but will be taken next year, at the beginning of next year, with a deeper analysis on the effects of a drastic prohibition of this figure, and taking into consideration the concerns of all the different sectors of not only the auto industry, but all the sectors of the industry. That's my comment.
Thank you, Dr. Sosaya. Yeah, at times it seems that Mexico is its own worst enemy, doesn't it? Anyway, we are almost out of time. I will ask our group of panelists to give us some concluding remarks, starting here with Bruce, please.
Sergio, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the panel. I always learn new things about Mexico from listening to the panelists talk about what they're working on in terms of the Mexican auto industry. I guess I have a question for Guido, and it has to do with kind of profitability of the manufacturers. When we look at what's you were talking in the past, in the 1990s, we would say that if the U.S. Vehicles sold were 15 million vehicles, everybody made money. And obviously people were making money at 16 million and 17 million. And we're going to be dropping down into that 15 million, 14.8, 15 million this year. Do you see this as being a profitable year for the manufacturers, even with the reduction?
That's a great question, Bruce. And I guess it builds up to the wrapping up point here. And The straightforward answer is yes. And the reason behind it is we have moved away from passenger cars into highly profitable vehicles. Transaction prices are extraordinary. Incentives are not as, despite the fact that we have seen incentives go up relative to some of the transaction prices that we're seeing. That it's minimal. We aren't selling to fleet as aggressively as we used to sell in previous years. So some of the low margin part of the business is out of the equation, which required, to your point, it required a minimum of a 15 million unit industry from a production standpoint in order to break even. And that was recap from 2008, 2009, because it really led to the bankruptcy of the U.S. Oems. So at least that story is not there right now. And I want to build up on that standpoint to wrap up here. Is we are going through an extraordinarily disruptive period with significant uncertainty. But the automotive industry features some of the most brilliant minds that we have around the world, particularly in Mexico. And it took us a year and a half to basically come out and adjust from the Lehman Brothers crisis. It only took us about 60 days to adjust to the pandemic. And in the grand scheme of things, we're moving ahead full steam. Let's continue to work on that. Let's continue to remain focused because we are generating profits. And if anything, all of our attention needs to fall on the human factor and protecting the human factor at this point of time because of how valuable it is. I think worrying about going back to 17 million units or going back to some of the historic dynamics that we have seen for the automotive industry are less critical at this point of time rather than making sure that we get things right. So congratulations to everyone that has had a spectacular year on the OEM side, on the supplier side throughout 2020. It has certainly not been easy, but congratulations to a job well done. Continue focusing on that. The dynamics are changing, so we can't necessarily think about a fully developed 3 to 5 year long-term plan, which is what we like to do as thinkers. But at least for the short term, we are navigating through, and we're navigating through profitably, which is the most important part.
Thank you, Guido. Guido's firm, IHS Market, is a really large firm. They have like over 10,000 employees, and they are about to merge with Standard & Poor's. Isn't that true, Guido?
So we have entered a process of requesting an approval from governments. Standard & Poor's is in the process of trying to acquire IHS Market. That's certainly the case, and that's about as much as I can say at this point of time, given regulatory restrictions that we have. But yes, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Don Sergio.
Very, very good, Guido. And Dr. Sosaya, can you give us your final remarks, please?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I am very honored to be and to share this panel with Bruce and Guido, and coordinated by you, Sergio. And I will have to add a little more of about what Guido said. The auto industry, at least in Mexico, and I'm sure all over the world, has gone through a very tough test period this year, from shutting down the plants to international economic and sanitary crisis. And we have shown that we are a strong and productive sector and industry. We are coming out of it. We are going up on sales and exports in a very steady and I would say fast way. And also very important, it's my personal opinion that because this financial crisis becomes from a sanitary crisis. Once the sanitary crisis is under control, the financial crisis will very fast will recover. That's my personal point of view, but I do think it's very important and relevant to point out how the auto industry has behaved under very, very tough circumstances and responded very fast and adequated to the needs accordingly to the conditions. Thank you very much again for the invitation to participate in this panel.
Well, thank you to Dr. Sosaya, to Guido Vildoso, and to Bruce for your participation. And with that, right on time, we finish this panel, and we invite our audience to join us for the other webinars that Mexico Now is offering in the following 2 days. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.